is this kid really crying more than 97.5% of kids? Probably not.
How important is this relationship?
What should I be measuring? We need to be self-reflective about our own insecurities, what they are, and how they influence the way that we interpret. If we are really going to be rational, then we need to be intentional about it. If we can take a moment to pause and ponder, then we will give ourselves a chance to not just emotionally react, but to actually go through the numbering, calculating, reasoning, reckoning that takes more than 1 second sometimes.
If the high priest in your head is in charge, if the king is in charge, you're a man of discernment. And you can see things as they are. You can read between the lines. You can read the room. You can understand that what people bring to you is not always what's really happening. What they say isn't what they mean.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.
Rocky has a TV face and a radio voice combo because he's easy to understand. He enunciates, and he kind of like has a Superman kind of looking face.
We're back in the studio here with Dr. Rocky Wright, who is joining us on the conversation about discernment. In the last episode, we talked about self-awareness and looking at ourselves, being aware of our own biases, being aware of our tendencies and habits of perception. We talked about how to sort through a never-ending barrage of opinions and things that are laid out as fact. We talked about how to decide what is right and true, how we can make good decisions that way. I want to talk about expectations and how we can keep realistic expectations of ourselves and other people. When I work with people regarding their mood and their relationships, one of the common things that's behind almost every negative emotion and every negative reaction that we have is an unrealistic expectation. It's the demands that we have about ourselves and other people. You know, I must be respected. I must never be questioned. I must be on time. A guy who developed some of this cognitive behavioral stuff uses the word masturbation to describe the musts that we have about life. So we're just basically walking around demanding for things to go our way, and then we get upset when they don't. Our kids aren't being obedient, just everyday frustrations. But how can we keep healthy and realistic expectations of ourselves and other people? Rocky, as a leader and a father, a medical professional, there must be some standards. I mean, in the last episode, we talked about good and bad, and the mindfulness argument is that there is no good or bad. Just observe, just sit in your life and realize that there's nothing right nor wrong, nothing good nor bad. It just is what it is. But that doesn't work when you're dealing with critical medical situations, surgeries, and so forth. How do you maintain standards and also have realistic expectations?
So let me get to the medicine stuff in just a little bit and start with expectations in a setting that began for me even before medicine, and that was marriage. So the short answer about how do you manage expectations or whatever might be given by my wife, who, when she was asked how she stayed happily married to me for 16 years, she unapologetically said, I lowered my expectations. So we joke about it, but it's not all false. And in this setting, my favorite equation, and I bring this up often, is satisfaction equals experience minus expectation. I'll say it again. Satisfaction equals experience minus expectation. And we're all looking for increased satisfaction, right? So if our experience is a 10 out of 10, but our expectation was a 0 out of 10, then our overall satisfaction is a 10, right? We were surprised and it was awesome. Satisfaction is a 10. Now let's say that our experience was a 3 out of 10, but our expectation was a 5. Well, then our satisfaction is a -2. So this applies, now there's a simplification of a very complex thing, which is experience of life. But really, satisfaction does equal experience minus expectation. So a key component of that is setting realistic expectations. So when we're thinking about expectations for others, we'll start with that, expectations for others. And I'll start in the operating room because this is an environment that I've kind of grown up in. And I say I've grown up in because I have worked in the operating room as a cleaner, someone who cleaned operating rooms. I was an operating room nursing assistant. Someone who helped the nurses in the operating room. I was an anesthesia tech who was a helper of anesthesiologists in the operating room. And now I'm an anesthesiologist. I'm a physician. I'm a leader in the operating room. So this one room, which is an interaction of multiple people, I have seen this room from lots of positions on the pseudo hierarchy of medicine. And being able to see this situation from multiple perspectives, in part because I have lived them, I have been there, it allows me to empathize with other people because I have been there. If we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, if we can empathize, then we can much more appropriately set realistic and reasonable expectations. So that's a key component. To be able to, we can't always play the role of everyone in a situation, right? We can't always do that, but we can try and learn about each of the people in that situation. And so a little phrase that I like is listening to learn, not just listening for our turn to talk.
Ooh, I like that.
So I love to learn. I am a lifelong learner. I have a personal mission statement. I like alliteration too. So lifelong learning, that's something that resonates with me. And so when we're interacting with people, we need to listen to learn. That will help us understand them and their perspective. That will help us empathize with them. And then that will help us thereby set reasonable expectations for them. All right. So another point about how I approach setting expectations for others is really considering what should I be measuring in terms of their production, in terms of their behavior, in terms of the outcome. Well, actually, the question is, should it be the outcome? Should that be what we are measuring? And so if you were to ask I have 2 boys, 9 and 12-year-old boys, and if you were to ask them, what does dad say all the time? Or what does he say most? And their answer would be attitude and effort. Attitude and effort. And because that's what I say to them all the time. It turns out that I am less concerned about the outcome most of the time, which turns out they can't always control everything about that. But I am much more concerned about what they can control. And what they can control is their attitude and their effort. So I say that all the time. Attitude and effort, attitude and effort. That's what I'm trying to measure. Now, it's difficult to measure that because there aren't the same objective measures.
They're moving targets.
They can be, yeah, and they're very subjective in their evaluation. But for me, at least, while it might be more difficult or subjective to put a number score on on their attitude and effort. As I invest time in that relationship, I can get a sense for, to some degree, what their actual attitude and what their actual effort were. Maybe not exact, but if that's what I care about, then I think I'm going to find a lot more satisfaction and also set expectations much more appropriately for them. So, and then the next thing, and I'm going to share a couple examples here, is we have to communicate clearly our expectations and then be willing to negotiate them. So spousal relationships are relationships that
here
hopefully
we go.
those of
It's
us
getting real.
Drum roll.
Exactly. So these are big deals. And most of us don't do them great, or at least we sometimes feel like we don't, or we're sometimes told by our spouses that we don't. So whatever the case, but it's an incredibly important relationship. It's an incredibly important part and aspect of our life. So an example of managing expectations or setting realistic expectations. So my wife likes it when I go shopping with her. And what she will oftentimes say is, will you go to the store with me? And I'm a little bit selfish with my time because I don't have a lot of it. And I'm probably not totally unique. Like, our time is incredibly precious and valuable. And, you know, I have weeks where I work 103 hours in a week. And so the free time that I have, that's not every week, but sometimes I do. So this free time is sometimes precious, and not that my wife is not precious, but she would ask me to go to a store with her. And
What kind of store? Are we talking in about obligatory shopping? Like, got to go to the grocery store? Or I would like to look for this that's choice, and I would like you to come along with me. Is that the kind of shopping we're talking about?
all of it. This applies to all of it.
Everything.
So
Okay.
this is kind of generic thing because it happens so often to us. So all the different, and we're getting better at it. But this is the issue that I had. So she would say, "Oh, come to the store with me." And in my mind, my expectation is one store. And I am
so on board with this. I hear you. Keep going.
I am committed to one store. And then one store becomes 2 stores, that then become 3 stores, and then becomes 4 stores. And I feel betrayed because
You've been tricked.
She dragging me along. And again, my time is precious. She said a store. And so I expected, my expectation was one store. And then I get frustrated because it's not one store. But then I also get frustrated at myself because I know I should love to be with my wife doing these things. And I'm clearly being selfish with my time. And I should just love going along with her. So then I get frustrated with myself for being frustrated that I'm being dragged to all these stores. And then I still take it out on her, but it's now grown a little bit more. So then she gets bothered and she's disappointed because I'm frustrated and I'm not just super happy just to be with her. And so in her defense and mine, like I said, she and I, we're both getting better at this. And we both are better at what I would call owning our expectations. Mm-hmm. And what owning our and we got that from a book that we read on our honeymoon. It was specifically talking about physical intimacy and marriage, but it applies to like all of these things. So owning your expectation, which is accepting it and then being willing to communicate it to your partner. So we're much better at with the shopping thing, her saying, will you come to the store? And I say, how many stores? And we say before how many stores it's going to be. And if it's 1, then it is 1. If it is 2, then it is 2. But our expectation is now in sync. It's not just until she feels like she's done. It's now been quantified because I needed that quantification. So we own our expectations.
Our wives got to be sisters.
So here's number 2 example. So with our kids, sometimes my wife is, again, amazing at many, many things. She worried that I would say some things that would either embarrass her or paint her in a bad picture. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to show contrast.
Right.
And again, we have boys. I am a boy. Maybe there's some similarities there. She is a girl. And so maybe that there could be some reasons for the disconnect. But so sometimes with our kids, my wife will say that they can't play with friends until the house is clean. But they hate that because they don't really understand what that means.
What the definition is.
It's so subjective. And when she gets them going in a positive direction and she just wants them to keep moving, it was like, okay, we got through this room real fast. Let's go to the next room. We got momentum. And then our boys are like, I thought it was just that room. And there's no clear finish line. And so they get frustrated. And then when the next time comes around, they don't even want to start because they don't know when it's going to end. Mm. So I've talked to my wife a little bit because I could relate to the boys. Like, I get it, right? How many stores are we going to go to today? How many rooms are we going to clean? So we're getting much better at communicating with our boys exactly what you are expected to do. And then sometimes with my 12-year-old who is a little bit better at communicating and negotiating, I'll ask him to do something and I will set either a deadline or a clear expectation. And then we'll actually negotiate a little bit. And I will allow my stance to be negotiated because I actually value his opinion. And sometimes now that he's 12, he can actually make some valuable arguments or reasons for adjusting the expectation. So clearly we should be willing to negotiate with our spouse, but we should definitely also be willing within reason to negotiate with our kids. Not that they push us around, but we need to clearly identify, own our expectations.
That's genius.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then here's where I really do have to celebrate my wife. She is in terms of grace and forgiveness and letting go of grudges. She is my exemplar. So we'll talk more about, we may talk a little bit more about emotions. I am not a super emotional person, much more analytical. She is more emotional, but we talked about today before I came over here. Do you remember our last argument or what it was actually about? The last time we disagreed or you got frustrated with me. And neither of us, well, it happens occasionally, neither of us could remember the details, in part because I don't get as emotionally connected to it. And then, so I don't remember the details quite as clearly. And then she forgives so readily that she lets go. So in terms of our managing expectations for other people, I have to credit her as an example of being willing to forgive, to let go, to have some grace. So that's kind of a few of my thoughts on expectations for other people. Now we have to get to expectations for ourselves, which is critical too. So one, I think we need to focus on what we can control, not on what we can't control. And this is, again, where we get back to attitude and effort that I talked to my kids about. Mm-hmm. I also apply it to myself. What can I control? My attitude, my effort. So like I said, it's a little bit difficult to measure objectively attitude and effort, but we do have some objective measures like yes or no, did I yell at my kids today? Yes or no, did I show up to work on time? Yes or no, did I exercise today? There are some objective measures that are the application of attitude and effort. So I have to then step to or reference a book that I absolutely love called Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg.
Mm-hmm. I've read it. It's great.
Yeah, it is absolutely great. And it applies here. So it talks about behavior and behavior management. And when we're making expectations for ourselves, what we are talking about is our behaviors, typically. You may try and have an expectation about some feeling or emotion, but really the objective measure is the behavior that follows. So this book is incredible at addressing behaviors. And so it's going to naturally inform us on expectations. So now this book is not your typical behavior book. It's not a motivational pep talk that gets you feeling pumped to drive yourself to accomplish something and then fizzles when you fall short. While those kind of books are useful in their own way, they don't produce long-term change. This book is kind of the opposite, and I love it for that. He is much more calculating, and I'm analytical, so I love the calculating approach. And he teaches this equation. Again, I love equations. So behavior equals motivation plus ability plus prompt when all three converge at the same time. So let me say that again. Behavior equals motivation plus ability plus prompt when all three converge at the same time. So we have to have sufficient motivation, we have to have sufficient ability, and then we have to have a prompt that prompts us to do the behavior, and they all have to come at the same time. So let me give an example of something simple, flossing my teeth. So I have gone through periods, I brush, that's a habit, absolute habit. But sadly, flossing is not always a habit for me, in part because I get done brushing and sometimes I haven't slept in forever and I'm exhausted and I just have to go to sleep. So, but I was like, I have to floss. I got to floss, right? So something was off in that motivation, ability, prompt situation. And clearly the prompt would be, I'm going to brush my teeth. So that's when there's a clear identifiable prompt to floss your teeth. It's when you brush, right? Easy. The ability to floss. It's not difficult, but sometimes I was like, oh, every single tooth. I don't know. Even flossing all the teeth. It was just like almost too much when I was just exhausted. And then my motivation was there, but it wasn't quite enough. So what he talks about doing is adjusting some of those. And so what I did is I made the flossing a little bit easier by making it a tinier habit. And a tinier habit is easier to accomplish. So my relative ability is higher. So I went in saying, I am just going to floss one tooth. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to floss one tooth. And I was like, that's not too hard. That takes 1 second, right? But what happens when you shrink the habit, you start tiny and then you can build from there. But what happened for me was after I was already in on that one tooth, I just did the rest.
Of course.
But the psychological effect of making the habit tinier opened the door to accomplishing the task.
I've heard that, like, do one push-up a day.
Yeah.
Just do one push-up.
So then let's apply it to something a little bit bigger, which is like getting up to exercise in the morning. Usually the barrier for a lot of people is like, it's easy to set your alarm. It's harder to not snooze it. So the behavior, the habit that this works in reverse. That's what I meant to say. This works in reverse. Breaking the habit of snoozing the alarm, right? So go through the behavior. The behavior is hitting the snooze button. The motivation to hit the snooze button is high because you want to sleep. The ability to hit the snooze button is high also because it's super easy to do. And then the prompt is the alarm goes off. Mm-hmm. So you have all three of those that create a situation where it is incredibly easy to snooze. Motivation to snooze is high. Ability to snooze is high because it's so easy. And then the prompt is right there. So I had to change something. I had to make it just a little bit harder to snooze. And so what I did was I took my alarm, which is my phone, and I just, rather than put it on the nightstand right next to my bed, I set it a few feet away. So to turn it off, I had to get out of bed to turn off my alarm. And I made the ability to snooze just a little bit harder, right? It lowered my ability to snooze just a little bit. And that simple move changed the game because I had to get out of bed. Once I was out of bed, I was like, dang it, I'm out of bed. I might as well just go do it.
Was your wife mad at this part?
To her credit, so her characteristics, incredibly full of grace and loving and forgiveness and incredibly good at sleeping. So it worked out well.
I did that once with the alarm, and I found that I could get up basically asleep, go to the other side of the room, turn the alarm off, come back to bed. And so I got this thing, it was called like Perfect Alarm, and it was an app, and you had to do you could set the number 3 or 4 math problems before it would
turn it off.
And so now I'm stood up, I'm on the other side of the room, and I have to do like long division 3 times in order to snooze it off. I had to trap myself. I had to get away from
So what you did is you made the ability to snooze, you decreased your ability to snooze. You made it harder to snooze. Mm-hmm. So it played perfectly into this overcoming the behavior, right? So, and then the other thing that he talks about is that we need to celebrate our victories. And I am a very critical person, and so sometimes that's hard for me, but I do think that we need to truly celebrate when we accomplish, and that's okay. It's okay to throw ourselves a little party, maybe in our brain, maybe in our mind, whatever, but it's okay to celebrate. And then this can be applied in interactions with others, and I've done this with my kids, recognizing for my kids, what is their motivation, what is their ability, and then what is their prompt. And as we start to understand that, we can, while we don't necessarily always control their motivation, sometimes we create incentives, but oftentimes we create incentives or punishments, right? When we're interacting with our kids, we're basically interacting in this same way. We are creating or influencing significantly the motivation, the ability, and the prompt, right? The prompt is us telling them to do something or setting up a schedule for them to do something. But if we approach our children when we want them to do something, focusing in a more organized way, what's their motivation? What's their ability? What is their prompt? then we can be a little bit more strategic in how we try and get them to do something.
Something there that seems to be the biggest problem that I run into in my profession here is the ability. So people think that their toddler should know how to keep their things straight and put their toys away and share, or they think that their teenager knows how to be fully responsible and that, they're only going to need, I only need 6 hours of sleep, so they should be able to go on 6 hours of sleep. And their ability is often misjudged. I think that's where there's a lot of upset in families and stuff is misunderstanding someone's ability. And we're prompting all the time. There's low motivation and they don't have the ability. That's fascinating. What was the name of that?
Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. Okay. So that gets into the next thing I think we were going to talk a little bit about, but what is normal?
Right. Yes.
So that kind of parlays a little bit into that. And I think one of the challenges that we have with our kids, and I have this with my kids, is that they're still developing, they're still learning, they're still growing. You kind of talk about a toddler, understanding what a toddler can or can't do, or what is normal for a toddler. Let me first say that sometimes as kids get a little bit older, I feel like we see their potential, their best, and then we hope or expect that they will always give their best. Like that becomes the new standard. And that's not fair to them. Right. They're not always going to be at their best. Mm-hmm. So let's jump then to normal. So normal is a tough question. What is normal? And one definition, a statistical definition, is that it's within 2 standard deviations of the mean or the average, right? So that captures 95% of people with 2.5% on the top, 2.5% on the bottom. So you're normal if you're within that 95%. So that means that there inevitably are abnormal people or things. 5% statistically would be abnormal if you use that definition. So if it's a crying toddler, you might ask yourself, is this kid crying? So if you're at the top end of how much do they cry, is this kid really crying more than 97.5% of kids? Probably not.
Right.
Is this kid complaining more than 97.5% of kids? Probably not. Right. So that's one way to approach normal. Like probably that behavior is normal.
Doctor, I'm dizzy. I just came out of surgery and I'm a little sleepy. Like what's going on?
What's wrong?
What's wrong here?
Yes. Wasn't me.
My mouth is dry and
yeah.
I want to throw up. This doesn't seem normal.
So yeah, it's with that, I try and manage expectations and talk about, potential risks. But yeah, understanding what is normal, that's one way to look at it. Is this person really exceeding 97.5% of people or things? Another way is like, well, is this normal? Is this acceptable by society? And that's a difficult one because that's a moving target. Mm-hmm. Like now as much as ever. Mm-hmm. Like, is this acceptable? A lot of things, if you use that measure, it's like it's trying to hit a moving target. That's tough to do. So is this expected would be another way. And so even the definition of normal can be a little bit tough, but that percentage thing is one way to look at it when we're approaching realistic expectations and standards and stuff. So where it's possible, we need to consider what it's like to be in that person or that kid's shoes. Now, I know it's hard to remember ourselves as a toddler, but I'll give a couple examples here. I do have memories of me as a 12-year-old. So we were at a church meeting yesterday, and our 12-year-old was sitting in front of us with his friends, and there was someone speaking. And so this is kind of a time when you're paying attention, supposed to be respectful. And he's sitting with his friends, and he got the giggles. And my wife looked at me like, that is so disrespectful. And I was like, yeah, it kind of is. But at the same time, I had flashbacks to when I got the giggles as a 12-year-old in like the exact same situation. If we can remember ourselves, or again, I've said this a few times, put ourselves in people's situations, I think we're much more likely to adjust our expectations and then increase our satisfaction. So, yeah, there's a few other things that I could say, but that's kind of the gist for a lot of those.
Well, I love the idea about, reviewing your own history and kind of looking around at the people around you. But some of this takes some reading. Some of this I tell people all the time, or ask, have you ever Googled that?
When you say take some reading, what do you mean?
Well, it just, you may not know what pregnancy is like. You're a young married couple, and the wife is all bitchy, and she's 6 months pregnant, and it's 112 degrees in Nevada, and is this normal?
For her to be behaving that way.
For her to, she's grouchy and she's pissy, and she's not sleeping well, and what's wrong here? And if you realize that all those things are normal, you may not know if you haven't experienced it unless you do some research, ask professionals, find a resource that can help you understand what might be expected, what could be the, a common outcome in this situation. So you have to do a little bit of homework on the thing. What developmental stage is your child in? You've got a 10-year-old. What developmental stage are they in? Most people don't even know what that means, but the psychosocial developmental stages,
So we have to be willing to learn for a lifetime.
Put some work into it, right? You seem to do very well with that. Obviously, you're a medical doctor.
So we'll talk this a little bit about professionalism then. And you introduce this topic with that, me being a physician. So in terms of expectations of professionalism. So we probably have more guidance or a more clear understanding of what is expected of us than maybe some areas. I mean, we have a Hippocratic oath that we all take. So on a graduating ceremony, we read off this card, right? The Hippocratic oath, which is, I guess, useful, but truthfully, it doesn't really impact us on a day-to-day level that often. Like, our personal commitment to being professional far outweighs the experience of reading off this card, this Hippocratic oath. What we have is, after high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years, in my case, of anesthesia-specific training, and then I have an additional 5 years in my path. So for me, that was, before I got my first job, 17 years of training and experience about how to perform or be what I was going to be, right? That's a lot of training to clarify for me the expectation of me. So in that process, I also had to engage in a lot of self-reflection and the consequences of my actions, and that self-reflection that informed and educated me too. I had to think about what I needed to do and was I doing it. And so I'll give one example of, professionalism or whatever. In our training, I was in my intern year. That's the first year of residency. You do a lot of different rotations and a lot of different things, and you're in different departments. And the first day of my first rotation with the anesthesia department, so what would become my home for the next few years, was in the ICU. That's with, the really sick people. And it was my first day. I had to do my best. I wanted to show up, right? And I wanted to make a good first impression. And then, so I set my alarm for super early. I was supposed to get there like 4:45, and I set it for like 3 o'clock or something, so I could totally get there early. And then something happened with my alarm, and it didn't go off, and I woke up at like 4:30, and I was going to be late. And so I raced in, and luckily had someone that kind of helped me, and there were layers of support. But I learned really quickly that, there's a consequence for being late. Like, there's a responsibility and there is a consequence. So that connection between, or the cause and the effect, the consequences of our actions, helps inform us about what our expectations, what professionalism is, and what our standards should be. And then maybe I'll say lastly, just like in terms of feedback about that, we also now send surveys to all of the patients. So I get feedback from patients about what they think about my services. And then you also get feedback from partners or peers. And all of these things inform you on what the expectation and also the consequence of your actions will or should be. So we have to listen to all of those to learn.
I think it was John Maxwell. He was talking about, probably in one of his leadership books, he was talking about he had this little quip: principles with clarity, practices with charity. And what he's saying is the standard has to be crystal clear. There is, be very clear about what it is you expect of people. But when it comes to in reality, you understand that sometimes sometimes the kid isn't going to behave themselves the way they should. Sometimes things won't go as planned. Principles with clarity, practices with charity. That's something that's helped me when we talk about standards and needing there to be some sometimes expectations are required.
I like that. As you guys were talking about expectations, and I think the word frustration got brought up because I've struggled with this over time. I think I've come up with this for myself. Most, if not all, of my frustration has come from unmet expectation. Now, that unmet expectation might be that that person did not give me permission to have that expectation of them. My wife, for example, Rocky's situation is similar. My wife will say, "You want to come go to the store with me?" And I learned after the first 2 times, come go to the store does not mean singular store. It means something different.
All day event.
It possibly could. And so for my own happiness, I had to kind of say, does this mean this? And at first she intended that, but she might have something decided along the way or happen along the way to that first store stop that added to those stops. But that was normal for her. So we went through a very similar, then I had a trigger, I'd had a moment where, do you want to come shopping? And no, I would avoid that like the plague. But yesterday we had a good one because I had to set myself up for, okay, she wants to go shopping. This is what this means. This could possibly be this. You need to be ready to help engage in her world because she often engages in your world. So I understood that. But I think frustration and expectations are tied, and that's giving someone the right to choose and have permission to either say, yes, I'm going to give you the ability to expect this of me. I agree with what we're agreeing on. Like Rocky mentioned, the negotiation. Now, when I negotiate with someone, whether it be an employee or a boss or a spouse or my kids, how well do I trust them to meet that obligation that they willingly committed to? That takes time. The time that Rocky's talking about, you have to invest that time to say, how well are you going to meet this? Because with an employee, I might have a very short tolerance for unmet expectation. Whereas with a child or a spouse, I have to say, how important is this relationship? If it's a very entry-level employee, I might have a very short tolerance, but I will explain that to them as well. Here's what our relationship is. With a spouse or a boss or a partner, I just went through one of these, for example. I had a business opportunity, and this was an Amazon delivery station. I don't know if you've seen this. All the Amazon vans that drive around, either they're marked Amazon or they're not, they are all subcontracted to business owners. And those are highly regulated and controlled by Amazon. However, they're trying to limit their exposure. So I was meeting with this business owner, and I could see within the first couple interactions, I've had plenty of positive as well as negative business interactions. And this guy wanted me to come on at a 6-figure salary with his particular situation. And I had agreed to that, even though my inner self said, something about this doesn't seem quite right. And it became very clear. Within the first 3 days, I knew that this particular person was not going to live up to what they said. And I ended the deal, and I basically sent an email saying, I can't let you introduce me to your group knowing that I have no intention. The things that I've been witnessing over the last 3 days, you're not accepting your responsibility. You're blaming other people. Here's what I think you're doing incorrect regarding this, and I'm not going to participate with you anymore. He was not happy at all, even though the Amazon people reported back to me and said, hey, we appreciate that. Hope that wasn't too negative an experience. I said, no, not a big deal. And he, ripped me in an email and things like that. But I didn't care because I could see where this relationship was going, and there was no way that I could enter into a negotiation with this person and have them live up to it. And so I decided to end it immediately.
So we're talking about discernment. That has so much to do with understanding, insight. It has to do with awareness. It has to do with fair judgment. We've just been talking about expectations. And I want to shift gears now toward what happens after the thing has occurred. So expectations really have to do with before this happens, before the trip to the store, before the event with our kids, before the work or the medical case. But then once things have happened, we have to interpret that. We do that very quickly. This is it's underneath the surface. It happens in a very short amount of time, less than 1 second. We're usually deciding what things are about and what they mean. It creates some emotional response. Many times our tendency is to personalize, and we're filtering things through this self-evaluation. Not only what does this mean, but what does this mean about me? I spend a lot of my time in my work with people trying to help them basically reinterpret the events of their lives and help them see things for what they are. So guys, help me out here. How can we interpret the events of life in a rational, objective way and not personalize and not get ourselves in some emotional mess because of a misinterpretation of the facts that have occurred?
So I really like this one because I think this is something I mentioned earlier that I try and do. I'm actively pursuing this rational evaluation and approach to things. So the word rational, it comes from a Latin word meaning reckoning or reason, numbering, calculating. So to be rational, you have to have the ability to reason and to calculate. And again, this is a purposeful thing. This is an intentional thing. If we are really going to be rational, then we need to be intentional about it. So you mentioned sometimes the response is an emotional one that happens almost instantaneously. Like that's the way we're programmed, planned, or built. If we can take a moment to pause and ponder, then we will give ourselves a chance to not just emotionally react, but to actually go through the numbering, calculating, reasoning, reckoning that takes more than 1 second sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we have to pull ourselves back for a second. So we're a product of our parents. So I'm going to talk about my parents for a second. My dad has been, still maybe is, but especially growing up, he was very emotional, and that was useful for him in many ways. He played football and he played into college. And so that emotion was groomed in him on the football field. That aggression, it led to his success as he fueled that fire of aggression in that setting, in that battle warlike setting. He thrived and it helped him. But it became harder for him later in life when anxiety and depression reared their heads. That's a totally different battle. And there were times where those emotions controlled him rather than him controlling his emotions. And his efforts to deal with this have been really a lifelong pursuit for him, and a pursuit that I admire him for embarking on. My mom, she's an accountant, much more analytical, much more calculating, and I take after her. Mm-hmm. So I come by that honestly. Now, she also experienced significant emotions too, and I didn't notice them when I was growing up, and many she hid from me. My parents ended up getting divorced, and I didn't recognize all the emotions that she experienced. But clearly, she did have a much more analytical side than my dad did. So I am much less emotional. So for me, this comes easier. It does not come easy for everyone to be able to pause and ponder, to take a step back and to actually make some calculations, to reason and to reckon. That comes easier for me than it will for some. But because of that, I'm much less likely to be triggered or have an emotion be triggered. But when I do have these feelings, they tend to be tempered enough that I can analyze them before they control me. And we have to get to that point where we can pause and ponder, where we can evaluate, why am I feeling what I am feeling before just the feeling swallows us up? And so that happens a lot with our kids. I love my boys immensely, but they also frustrate me more than probably anyone. And so there are moments where they won't do what I say, and I get really frustrated. And there have been times where I get really upset. However, when I pause and I ponder and I calculate, why are these emotions coming? What is it that's actually triggering or leading to these emotions? It's usually indirectly their behavior, but it's more my interpretation of it. I feel disrespected right now because of this action. They didn't do what I asked to do. And so then I'm like, well, that's kind of selfish. That's kind of egotistical. Is this about me or is this about him? And then I'll say, well, no, I feel disrespected and I do feel frustrated because I need him to do this thing so that we can all get to this place. So the goal is not just this thing. The goal is getting to this place, but this thing has to happen. And I start to calculate. These are all the calculations going on. And so then when I break it down, then I'm looking at these pieces and parts that are not emotional. There is a task. There's a child that needs to do the task. This needs to be done before we get to this place.
Timeline.
So I have to reevaluate how we get to that end goal. And then I evaluate in that equation, is the emotion a positive contributor to what I'm actually wanting? And usually if it's anger or frustration, it is not a positive contributor to what I actually want. But if it's just a quick response, emotional response, it's, I'm angry, he didn't do what I said. But usually it's more complicated. It's more nuanced than that. But we have to take the time to evaluate that.
How in the world do you do that? That's slowing that down. I mean, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I spend lots and lots of time with people trying to help them do that. and they just usually fail. And they're doing this the day after the event happened, or 7 hours after the fight occurred, and then they're just shortening that time. And then if they do this long enough, they can catch themselves in the middle of the argument and say, "Wait, hold on, stop," and then they continue to practice that, and then they can go into it, and they're just kind of imperturbable because they've been working at that rational interpretation of things for so long. But for you, do you have any tricks? I mean, how do you say anything vocally, like, hold on, boys, just a minute, let me sort this out? How do you slow yourself down?
So I try. I think that's the first step. I don't know that everyone tries. I think some people ride that wave of emotion. So if I'm thinking about it when I'm not upset, maybe this helps me to try.
Mm-hmm.
The next time I get upset with my son, I'm going to pause. And before I say anything, he's just disobeyed me. Before I say anything or before I do anything, as I start to feel that frustration, before I respond, I'm going to plan my response. I'm going to think about it. Maybe I'm going to give myself 2 options. Come up with 2 options before you respond. Maybe that's one way. Again, it comes a little bit easier for me because I'm able to step back, but I'm also doing it purposely. I'm trying. I know I want to, because it happens over and over again. A lot of these interactions that we struggle with, like they happen over and over again. So the next time, as soon as I start to feel this, before I respond, before my reaction, before the behavior, let's come up with at least 2 options. And that at least forces us to pause for a minute, come up with 2 options. And maybe in coming for those 2 options, we try and navigate the equation of that situation.
Well, yeah. And just to realize that there's more than one possibility, that gives you some power right there, because you recognize that you don't just have to do what your feelings dictate. The feelings aren't facts, for sure. We talked about fact and opinion before, and the feeling, that's the definition of subjectivity. So it's just what you feel.
So can I also say one other thing about words? Because a lot of times what people get really upset about or what triggers them are words, right? Mm-hmm. The way that people speak to them. And there's this, this age-old thing that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And so that was kind of the mantra for a while. And then the pendulum has clearly swung away from that. And I think while that whole words will never hurt me thing isn't fair, I don't think that the pendulum swinging totally away from that is fair either. Because while words can hurt, the truth is we have much more control of their influence on us directly than sticks and stones. So like if I fall out of a tree and my arm hits a branch, I don't really have control whether my bone breaks or not, right? I can't mentally think or pause and ponder, do I want this bone to break or not? Like we don't have the same kind of control.
Right.
So clearly there's a difference in terms of our ability to influence the effect of physical harm versus our ability to affect our response to verbal harm, right? So emotions are more complicated, they're subjective, therefore they are influenceable. We can't influence our response to words. We can have some control over our emotions. So an example of this are our kids have tried to say, I hate you to me and my wife on rare occasion, right? 9 and 12-year-old. And so in terms of, they have an intent to cause emotional pain. That's why they say that, right? That's their biggest verbal weapon that a kid can comprehend. But it also doesn't really offend or bother me that much. And here's why. So I understand that this kid is frustrated. Oftentimes he's tired. He's not getting what he wants from a parent that has so much control over his life. And in their mind, they're being attacked. So they attack back with their primitive verbal weapon. And so they say, I hate you. But the thing is, I know it's not true. So my son Logan, he says that sometimes. He loves his mom more than anything on this earth. But he'll get into these modes where he's stubborn, he's not getting what he's wanting. And even this kid who absolutely, without question, will say to us, I love mom more than you, Dad. And I love mom more than any, and he does. And to just snuggle with his mom is like his favorite. He loves his mom so much. And this kid has even said to his mom, I hate you. So the reason he's doing it is not because he hates her. He loves her more than anything. It's the tool that he's using in that moment to influence the situation.
And I would even say that before they're trying to influence the situation, it's the only way they know how to express what they're feeling.
Yeah. So it's an image. I said a primitive tool because it is immature.
Yeah, it's a power play.
But then if I recognize it for what it is, that it's an immature, primitive tool, well, I'm not going to get offended because he's using this tool. I'm just going to have to work with it.
Well, let me show you, and then you escalate the problem.
Exactly. If you have a child who has an ice cream, and they're kind of just at the walking stage, the ice cream falls off the cone, hits the ground. The immediate thing that I don't even have to say this, you're probably already thinking, they start smacking you and hitting you with their fist. Are they mad at you? No, they're expressing, I just lost my ice cream and I'm mad. And this is the only way I know how to express it. I think it's a similar thing. And so I don't think depending on the age. Now, as people mature, I think an adult says things that are hurtful because they're trying to manipulate, control, or to influence something. But when they're really young, it's just an expression of how they're feeling. And maybe that's even somewhere when they're older. They're just expressing, maybe it's poorly, obviously, but they're just expressing a feeling inside. That's a frustration that is coming out because they haven't learned differently.
What you just described, both of you guys, about that is what a discerning man does. You read between the lines. The manifested information is, I hate my mom, or I hate you, let me hit you. But you recognize that there's more than meets the eye with that. There's more to the story. This is a child who's upset. They have a limited vocabulary. Of course, this isn't, and that to me encapsulates this whole topic of what discernment is. It's knowing what things mean, right, and not reacting, and just, it's about the pause and ponder and slowing your response down. Love this stuff. You guys are great.
I loved what you said, Rocky, earlier. You said you have to plan a couple of responses. So I think when you go into certain situations, if you can be slow enough and intentional enough, you almost know with an interaction, the wife and the shopping thing now, the second you're asked the question, would you go shopping with me? It initiates a certain set of sequences of, here's the conversation that I'm going to have. Here's the way I interpreted it incorrectly before, and it starts off with this chain reaction. Now you know how to slow down to have a conversation in order to allow a certain set of expectations on both sides to be accepted and a certain set of results. And that whole set of interactions just is kind of the beauty of life, is so that you can learn how to associate with other people that are different, even if it's a spouse, so that you can have an interaction that could be different, that can still have a pleasant outcome, even if it's what you didn't want.
So I've seen that with my own wife. Like, sometimes we disagree, right? And she'll get frustrated with me and she'll express her frustration. Sometimes she'll even like try and take a jab at me and verbally or something. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
A jab physically.
No,
I've had that, and my wife hit me, and I'm like, wait a second. What did that just mean?
No, she doesn't abuse me physically. I should clarify. So, but I don't take that at face value. Luckily, I have a relationship where I know that she loves me. This is an expression of something else. So as she's expressing this to me, I am actually thinking, why is she feeling like this? Why is she saying this? And I'm trying to figure it out. Now, in that, if I do get to the point pretty quickly, like she didn't like that I was doing something on my phone or something like that, I wasn't giving her enough attention. If I feel like, well, I had to do this is a work thing, maybe I'll try and avoid it later. But in that moment, I felt justified. Maybe I made a mistake. I'll try and be better. I analyze it more that way. And what she is giving me is just data that I'll input into my decisions about behavior in the future, but I don't respond in an emotional way. And sometimes she hates that because she sees that she feels like, well, he's not getting upset, even though I'm upset at him. He must not care. And so sometimes we've had to have talks that it's not that I don't care. It's just, I'm not going to get worked up emotionally over this. I hear what you're saying. I appreciate your feedback. You wish I wasn't on my phone at this time. I will try and do better next time and not do it later. And for me, I've accepted the information that you've just given me and I will use it in the future. So again, it's a little bit cold and calculating, but that's one way that I approach it.
And why do you approach it that way?
Why? One part, I think that it is in part how I'm programmed or how my mind works. But for me, it is much more beneficial and functional. So if I get worked up, then ultimately things escalate and the ultimate outcome is worse than if I just absorb the information she's given me, try and interpret it, clarify. And I do this. I see that you're upset. Why exactly are you upset? Let's clarify that so I understand. And then I input it into, the decisions and I try and do better going forward. So I find that life is better, easier. I don't get worked up. I don't have the same emotional stress that I would if I were driven by emotion.
Okay. So what I hear on that is, one, you're trying to achieve a desired outcome. Definitely. by the logical. You're also trying to avoid an unpleasant emotional outcome. So it's kind of dual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And mutually, beneficial.
Okay.
Because if this does escalate, then this is not good for her.
It's going to be bad.
So this happens at work too. So as an example, we had some new work that we had to take on. We work at night sometimes, and we were absorbing another group that had some responsibilities for covering stuff at night. And so we had this discussion about who is going to be responsible for this night work. And no one loves working through the middle of the night, right? So we had this text chain going on, and none of us really wanted to do it. And we were trying to figure out how to divvy it up. And I jokingly, probably a mistake because you probably shouldn't joke in a text, but I jokingly said, oh, this guy should he should take all the calls every night. And I jokingly said that. And most of us who are on this text chain know that we're very sarcastic. But this guy happened to be there who is not normally on this text chain. And so the next time I saw him at work, he was so upset and he laid into me and he was swearing at me and yelling at me. And luckily, in a similar way, I could take that information that he's given me. He's clearly upset. There must be a reason. Why is he upset? And rather than yell back, because he was not justified in swearing at me in a hallway of a hospital, right? He was not. But what I recognized was there must have been some miscommunication. I need to understand better about what he's thinking. So my response to him when he's yelling and swearing at me was very calmly, well, we must have a miscommunication. Let's work through this. And that helped calm things much more quickly. So his emotional outburst, I didn't take it as a personal attack or offense. I was like, this is information that he's giving me. He's upset clearly. I need to understand the why behind it.
That right there is genius, because you didn't say, you must be miscommunicating. There must be some kind of communication. Let's see where it is. And it made it non-personal.
Yeah. Or also maybe a little bit non-personal, but also that we were mutually responsible, that I wasn't attacking him alone. I was saying, we need to do better.
Right.
We need to work through this. We're a team on this, like this conversation, whatever it is, or whatever the situation. So it was more team forming than divisive.
Nice.
I love it. Any other thoughts on interpreting things, understanding the meaning of things? Because if we react based on what we think things mean, since you were doing the formulas earlier, I think of Viktor Frankl, who talked about suffering, and he said, suffering doesn't create despair. Despair comes from suffering without meaning. And so his little formula is D equals S minus M. Despair equals suffering minus meaning, without meaning. And so we have to accurately understand the meaning of things in order for us to not get twisted up emotionally. And I think a discerning man is able to do that. Any final thoughts on that topic about interpreting things, understanding what they mean, slowing that process down, not jumping the gun?
Yeah, maybe just a few last things. One of those is, as you mentioned in a communication earlier, that it's not all about you, right? And in a lot of these interactions that we're describing, it is multiple people. It's not a one-sided thing. Expectations of others, communication. It's not a one-way street, right? It's not all about us. Another thing I would say is that we need to be self-reflective about our own insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to take time to recognize our insecurities, what they are, and how they influence the way that we interpret things. So we have to be self-reflective and then honest about our insecurities. And then we need to avoid projecting our paradigm onto other people. And then, kind of like I've mentioned before, that emotions are only a part of the input of information of our calculations. They shouldn't be the only thing that we calculate, right? There's something behind the emotions.
The thing that I liked about what Rocky said was he's constantly learning. That means constantly, one, being observing, two, being willing to ask the question, whether it's about the topic you're learning or whether it's about the person you're communicating with. I want to understand you. If we're doing that more or even slightly more, then, hey, please understand me, I think we get a lot further along. We understand. We are able to have an expectation that the other person is willing to meet or give us that expectation. When you're constantly looking to tell someone what they should do or how they should be or how we should expect things from them, that's a more painful way to come at it than it is from, let me understand if I can expect this from you. Is this what I'm understanding? Let's work on this together. There might be a miscommunication here. Let me ask you a question and let me listen to you. And then once we ask that question, their response, as we have continued communication with these people, we can know whether we can trust that response or not because of how it was previously. We might have to be open to someone setting us up for an incorrect expectation. Yes, you can expect this from me. And then we live through that experience to say, yeah, they lived up to that because they said they were going to do this and they actually followed through, versus they said they were going to do this and they repeatedly didn't follow up and follow through with their own admission, their own owning of that expectation. And I think that if we're more willing to listen and to understand than we are wanting to be understood, it's hard because as humans, we feel valued when we feel understood, and we want to tell that person. But if we can just do a little bit more of seeking to understand, we're a little better.
Yeah, just be curious. You can even play dumb. One of the most brilliant therapists that I ever learned from, she and I think her husband developed an entire model of therapy, and she, I believe, was Japanese, but she had a very thick accent. And she talked about just playing dumb. and just not knowing, like, wait, help me understand here. And that was one of her best tools to kind of play dumb and act like it was a language barrier as she was trying to understand her clients. And so asking, am I understanding this right? Is this where you're coming from? Instead of assuming that you even have the right information. So asking, that's one of those, I think that's one of the 7 habits, right? Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So I love our little list that we compiled there about how to interpret things appropriately.
And I think I'll just add, I've thought a lot about behavior and are certain behaviors rational or irrational? Are humans rational or irrational? And again, we can't simplify super complex things into a simple sentence. Humans are irrational. But because I've thought about it a fair amount, I do believe that if we understand the incentives that other people perceive, their behaviors will seem much more rational. The problem is sometimes discovering what their incentives are. So we do have to make a conscious effort to learn and understand what their perceived incentives are.
That's a good segue into our next segment here, our next section, which is about cause and effect. I believe that a man who's living in alpha energy, he's a discerning man. He understands cause and effect. There's a reason for things. Life is based on law. You put 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen together and you get water every time. You put that at 32 degrees for a certain amount of time and you're going to have ice. You put it at 212 degrees. I don't know if I have those right, but it's going to be boiling pretty much every time. So life is based on law. Things there is a cause to every effect and an effect to every cause. Let's talk about that. How can we see better cause and effect? Something's going on we don't like. We don't like how things are happening in our relationships and our job. We don't like the way we're being treated. There was talk earlier about things we can control and things we can't. What do we do about cause and effect?
So
No, go ahead.
I don't have a whole lot more to say here because I think this parlays into a lot of the other things that we have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say that equation of H2O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen equals water is true and valid. It's also very simple. And the difficulty that we have is that the equations that we're working with in terms of human interaction or our satisfaction, we mentioned that one equation, satisfaction equals experience minus expectation. But a lot of the social interactions that we have are very complex. And so the components of the equation, once you dive down into the depths of them, are a little more complex, and sometimes figuring out what they are. I mentioned the incentives that people have, that their perceived incentives.
Right.
It takes time and energy to discover those. And it's not in every science book, H2O. It's not usually even published. And so it takes investment in relationship to discover what the components of their particular equation are.
Can I bug you to talk about, what do you mean by incentives? Just the person's goal. What is their goal-directed focus? Their incentive is?
I believe that we are incredibly incentive-directed.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we recognize the incentive or not, we follow incentives. Whether it is an emotional feeling that is positive, whether it's a desire to avoid a negative emotion, whether it is the feedback from performance from someone else, whether it is compensation of pay for work done. I think almost every decision we make, we could track to an incentive. We're doing this for a reason. And sometimes they're subconscious. We don't think about them, but I think that we are incredibly incentive driven. So understanding what someone's incentives are is important. So I'll give an example. We can't project, again, like I mentioned earlier, we can't project our own paradigm on someone else. So let me tell you about when I was a missionary in Honduras, and when our church sends out missionaries, we work in companionships or teams of two typically, and there's a lot of reason for that. So I was sent to Honduras with marginal competency in Spanish, and I was paired up with a Nicaraguan native Spanish speaker, was learning Spanish a little bit, but still learning, and he was great. And then I got a second companion, also from Nicaragua, and this guy was so mean to me. And I remember distinctly one time we're walking down a street, and he was just mocking me about my Spanish and just putting me down. And here we are in this environment where we are committed, I felt committed to do good, to help other people, to uplift other people. We're trying to, really just do good. And that's the focus. And in the context of commitment to do good, my partner in this
He's busting your balls about your Spanish.
It just beat me down. And I'm like, and so I hated him. And I was like, I don't know why you're treating me this way, but being with you is awful. I don't like you. And you're treating me unfairly. And I really didn't try and get to know him because I'm like, you're not worth it. So that pairing lasted 6 weeks, and it was the most painful 6 weeks of the 2 years. And months later, I'm somewhere else, and I hear about that this guy from Nicaragua, he ran away and disappeared, was found later in Nicaragua, hitchhiked home. And then I find out that he had been going through terrible personal things. His family was falling apart. He felt no support. He was going through emotional struggles. And in his suffering, what he was trying to do was, in an immature way, lift himself up by pushing me down. And we see that a lot with bullying, with all that kind of stuff. A lot of people push other people down to theoretically lift themselves up. And it's counterproductive. We know it doesn't work, but people still do it. So in that time, I didn't take the time to learn why he was treating me the way he was treating me. I just didn't.
You didn't have the experience at that point in your life to understand that's what was going on, correct?
I didn't think it was an option. Yeah. So I didn't know. And so now, because of that, I would be much more inclined, if someone were to be treating me poorly, I would get to the why, or try to get to the why. Now, in my defense, maybe my Spanish wasn't good enough at that time to have the kind of conversation that we would need to pull that out of someone. So maybe I was a little handicapped in that process. But the moral is that, yeah, people are going through things, and his incentive, which I didn't realize, was I put him down, that lifts me up. And that was kind of driving him because he felt so beaten up by his own situation. So if I had been able to, or could, I should have investigated more his incentives, the why behind it. And that could have helped us probably work through some things. And I actually maybe had been able to help him a little bit. Now, you can't force help on someone, but I would have had a lot better chance.
So it's like you attributed what he's doing to his character, and maybe it did represent something about his character, but you assigned some meaning to what he was doing, that he was just a jerk, he was just mean to you, he was not caring, he wasn't committed to the mission and the goals of that. And instead of understanding that there was some other cause, some other stuff beneath the surface that you didn't know about.
Yeah, my paradigm was, he's mean to me, he's a jerk, so we're going to push that on him. Or the way I'm feeling attacked, so he's the attacker, right? I'm the victim, he's the victimizer. That's the way it is. So my paradigm, my experience, I imposed on him rather than investigating what he was actually going through, his incentives, his reasons for doing this. Yeah.
Wow. I often teach people what I call the rule of thumb, which is whatever you think the reason is, you're trying to figure out the cause of something, put it on your thumb. He's a jerk. Maybe that's the reason. He's maybe just really a jerk, but give me 4 other reasons why that could be the case. He has an illness that is untreated. He's uncomfortable. He's, he's homesick. He's got family drama. Give me 4 other reasons in addition to the one you believe is the thing that you've assigned as the cause.
I wish I would have had that rule of thumb when I was there.
Yeah, I mean, because sometimes it is it. Sometimes she cheated on you because you're ugly. Sometimes this thing happens because you're no good at your job, and the reason you got fired is because you sucked. But sometimes it's because the company has problems or some other thing you don't know about. We can never really know.
I think that's one of the benefits of learning service as early as you possibly can, is because when you're serving or when you're attempting to serve others, you are, as a byproduct, getting to understand true human nature. My personal belief is that all humans have a nature. We all have certain things that are natural to us, and we all have things that we work on. But I think that all human nature is universal. It's just a matter of understanding where a human is in that pattern, in that process, in that path. But I do believe that, and I don't think that it's realistic to expect a certain person at a certain age to understand true human nature. But I do believe that humans, based on things that are natural to them and their environment, that they have tuned into human nature at certain points earlier, and that they can learn to discern. Sometimes they don't even know that they do it. I think that we can see a youth that is extremely in touch and sensitive to the feelings and needs of others, and they're capable of pausing, and this intentionality that Rocky was talking about, they're capable of being intentionally pausing to listen to another. There's something about it. When you watch a human that can do that at an early age and you can observe that, it's really cool. Just as cool as it is for a dude to watch somebody throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball or throw a 100-yard pass. I think it's just as cool to me to be able to watch a human early in their stage of life be able to be in touch with another human's feelings and be able to interact with them at a much more mature level than maybe others around them. It's cool to watch.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on cause and effect, just in general, maybe that's self-explanatory, and we've given a couple of examples there. Do you have anything else on that, Rocky? I want to wrap this up with basically just a message that we've repeated, hopefully, in every one of our messages, and that is that we need men. We need a tribe of mentors. We need to seek wisdom from others. That's kind of what I'm doing personally by trying to do this podcast. Every couple of weeks, I sit down with some really smart dudes. As you can see here, Rocky Wright is just a genius level and a very wise man. So it's helpful for me to have these conversations. Also for the listeners, they're kind of by proxy, they kind of have these, and it's not a live conversation for them, but they're gaining wisdom from others. What about the role of mentors in your life? Having other men around, you talked about 17 years of training to do your medical work. How does that work for you? Who are your advisors?
So in terms of success and in terms of managing expectations and communicating, I think we'd be remiss if we don't talk about failure, because failure is inevitable. Some failure, not failure in everything, but some failure is inevitable. And I generally have spoken in pretty positive ways, but I would be remiss again if I don't mention that I have failed a lot, and I have learned a lot through failure, and I think a lot of us can. And so when we're dealing with expectations, when we're dealing with falling short personally, we can beat ourselves up. It can be discouraging, but I think it's important to learn to use failure as an educational tool, experience, that even the process of failing, when you are able to use it as a springboard, can be a mentoring experience or a teaching experience. So I'll just mention a couple things. So again, I have failed a fair amount, and I know Mike, I appreciate and respect him. And one of the reasons I respect him or admire him is he played baseball, and he played baseball in college. And not only did he play baseball in college, but he has 2 fingers on his left hand. And so I played baseball growing up, and I definitely wasn't as committed as I could have been. But then right around in high school, I really got more committed and was on the freshman team, the JV team, and then was kind of all in, but I got cut from the varsity team. That's kind of crushing for a teenager who's at that point had committed so much, right? And maybe there was some politics in it, being this other guy and the other guy's dad donated more money. Maybe that was it. Maybe I wasn't good enough. I don't know, but that's hard, right? So I had to learn, even as a teenager, what do I do with this? This was a big deal to me at the time. And I ended up saying, okay, so it's not going to be baseball for me. Sometimes the story is you recommit, right? But in this case, it was redirect. And so I ended up going into student government stuff and thrived in student government and made friends and had experiences. And rather than let that failure beat me down, I used it as a springboard into something else with my wife. So I had decided that I liked her and I wanted to go out with her. And so I asked her out and she said no. And so then I asked her out again.
Yeah, wait, this is your wife you're currently married to, right?
Yeah. So I guess spoiler alert, we got married. But it was, I'm not alone. I'm not unique in that it took me a couple tries to get that one going. And so I got rejected from her. I failed with that. But again, another one that's even was harder at the time was my desire to become a physician. So I didn't have a great mentor through college, in part because I transferred midway and we had a pre-med department and there were so many of us that wanted to do medicine and they basically said, whatever, these are the requirements, do your best. And so I didn't really have a mentor. So I tried to wing it. And I've done that a lot in my life and sometimes it works and sometimes it makes it harder for me. So this probably does parlay into the mentorship conversation because in this instance, I didn't have a mentor and I tried to wing it. And I got all the requirements for medical school. I took the MCAT, that's the test for entrance, and I got a decent score, average for not only for those that take it, but average for those accepted. With me just kind of studying on my own from some books. And then I applied, I ended up getting waitlisted and then ultimately last minute never got a spot. And then I was delayed on the next year's, it's a year-long process almost for application. And then I'm delayed on the next year's. So that not getting in the first time cost me 2 years. And so then I quickly applied and then got rejected a second time because I hadn't been able to improve the application a ton. And so I got rejected from medical school twice.
Wow.
And in part because I didn't have a mentor to kind of guide me and explain to me some of the things and kind of the process and how it works. I was kind of going about it on my own. And so then through that failure, I had to so this is 2 years and it feels like a lifetime. I've been rejected twice. Am I even good enough for this? You start questioning yourself, right? And I was fighting an uphill battle. I'm a white male and statistically I had to do better than average for acceptance was not good enough for me. Mm-hmm. I had to be much better than average for acceptance, not even average of those applying. I had to be better than average because of the demographic that they were seeking. It was not me. So, but I didn't really realize that going into it. No one really explained that to me. So I had this moment where I was like, okay, if I really want to do this, I got to commit. I got to do it. I got to go all in and I'm going to redo some things. And I took a preparatory class for that MCAT and I ended up with the extra support, with the extra teaching, I ended up scoring in the 98th percentile.
Wow.
98th, 99th percentile. And then was able to get accepted to multiple medical schools with that improvement. I wish I would have known how important that test, I knew it was important, but I didn't realize that I had to be that good. With the renewed commitment, I was validated in at least on that one test for whatever that's worth, which is not all encompassing in terms of its evaluation capacity, meaning it doesn't tell you everything about how good someone is. But in that objective measure, I was nearly the best of the best, or close to, right? 98th, 99th percentile. So, and then things my career ended up proceeding from there. So for me,
spoiler alert, medical doctor.
yeah. And so things have, generally speaking, worked out, right? But that failure was very formative for me in terms of that time. It wasn't redirect. This was recommit, right? But it also has affected me a lot in terms of humility, in terms of my approach to other people, in terms of lots of things. The way I interact with people, I think that influenced. So failure and how you deal with it can be incredibly important, and it will happen to everyone.
Sure.
So that then it's a teacher, it is a mentor in and of itself if we let it be something that will either positively redirect or allow us to recommit.
So was there someone along the way that helped you understand that, or was it just through the school of hard knocks that helped you learn that?
That was the school of hard knocks.
Failure was the mentor.
Failure and my interpretation or use of it. So we can't say that it's a passive process.
Right. It just happens and then you learn.
Yeah, it's not that way, right? Every failure creates a fork in the road. And sometimes it's like a fork, a decision between A and B, and sometimes it's like, branches into 5 or 10 different roads. But failure is a decision point, right? And it's a definitive decision point. It in and of itself does not teach you unless you let it.
So there are some people that will admit they learn from either the teaching or the experience of others. Would you say you are one that learns from a mentor, or would you say that you are one who learns from your experiences? Or is there been a time when either one of those have been applicable?
Yeah. So my dad told me that a smart person learns from their own mistakes and a wise person learns from other people's mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so my dad would probably describe himself as someone that's had to rely on his smarts, like his own mistake. He would probably admit this, right? A fair amount in his life. But that's, I don't know if he even remembers telling me this, but man, it stuck with me. And so there are definitely times in my life where I've had to learn from my own mistakes. But then there have been times where I've tried to learn from others. And, even my dad, he's taught me so much through his own struggles, and he's helped me to be better and to avoid struggles and to handle my own. So even in his struggles, he has been a mentor to me. So I don't have a single role model. I will mention 2 of my grandpas, I guess.
Okay.
So one of my grandfathers, he was born on a farm, and he just wanted to get off that farm as soon as he could. That was like goal 1, get off the farm, right? And then World War II broke out.
Oh.
So then he became a fighter pilot in World War II. He went on to do good things for the Allies there. He went on after that to help establish the Utah National Guard and Utah Air National Guard. And they ended up naming the base after him. He was also a lawyer and did tons of great things. So he was given leadership roles in our church in New York and Washington, D.C. I mean, he did some amazing things. He's like an American hero to us. And according to his funeral, well, there are tons of people there. Apparently he's a hero to lots of people too. Mm-hmm. He's since passed away. But the stories that he would tell were about people. It was about interaction with people, the people that mattered to him and why they mattered to him. And this is him in his 90s. As we're sitting down and he's like, getting sicker, and he's telling me about people. It's about people. And so here's this guy that has done amazing things. And what he cares about in his last years is people and the relationships that he had. That was incredibly impressive to me and helped me prioritize people and relationships. Relationships matter. And my other grandpa, he was the son of a milkman, and he ended up going to law school and then became a lawyer and then a politician and then a real estate developer and was like super successful. And his greatest joy was his family, and all these resources that he had acquired, he used to buoy the relationship in his family. And so he taught me that family relationships matter. And so I appreciate both of them. And I mentioned grandpas because it's the relationship feeds the credibility. The relationship feeds the impact of what they can mentor. I've read lots of books that have been helpful, and that's very useful. So mentors indirectly, YouTube videos, whatever, podcasts, those are very helpful. Relationships are even more powerful when the mentorship comes from a relationship.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing that about your family members. I can imagine that that's the kind of person that you are becoming with your own sons. You've talked about your dad today. You've talked about your grandfathers on both sides. And those relationships have shaped you because of the relationship, not just the information. You could read a book, you could listen to a YouTube video, you can get some ideas from many places, but the relationships are what help us the most. Dude, I appreciate it. Rocky, this has been seriously one of the most incredible things that we've done. I'm telling you, this show, this is high level. I mean, wouldn't you say, Mike? This is how would you compare this to some of the others that we've done?
You know, I think that there's lots of dude talk. We kind of understand that, but Rocky has a way of intellectually connecting with emotion. You know, you talk about the education that you get from books and from things, but knowing that the relationships and the importance of the relationships. That's why I've always liked talking with Rocky and listening to Rocky, because he has that ability. I plan on trying to pull more information out of his head and out of his heart, you know, in the future. But
you're just trying to figure out this shopping thing. Saturday, that's what you want to get from it.
Yeah, the fact that we might have wives that were actually sisters, and I'm still trying to figure out, wait a second, is this just how all relationships are with husbands and wives? Do they all try to trap us into shopping experiences? No, but I think those are things that as we learn, as we have discussions with, they help us understand, they help us communicate, they help us empathize. I love those connections.
We're talking about this topic, discernment, because if you want to be a strong man, if you want to operate from your highest self, if you want to operate from the highest level frequency within you, if the high priest in your head is in charge, if the king in your head is in charge, you are a person of discernment. You're a man of discernment, and you can see things as they are. You can read between the lines. You can read the room. You can understand that what people bring to you is not always what's really happening. What they say isn't what they mean. And you're a person who's sensitive to that information. Probably my favorite message today, Rocky, is pause and ponder. That's probably going to be the title of this, Pause and Ponder, because I think that is what a discerning person is able to do. They recognize that they can't just quickly, if you're in a surgery and something goes wrong, you have to make a decision immediately. But in life in general, we don't typically have to do that. We can wait a minute and make sure that we're being fair as we make decisions about what's going on and what our next steps need to be. Dude, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I'm telling you, I'm going to ask you to do this again at some point. So I hope you're game.
Well, I appreciate it so much. I mean, I was a little bit intimidated by the topic. And so I've taken a lot of time this last night and this morning to pause and ponder the topic. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
Talk about intimidation. I'm sitting here listening to you like, oh my gosh, I'm a redneck. I'm an ignorant freaking, how old are you? I don't know if
40
years old.
Turning 41.
Gracious. My dad always says it takes 40 years to make a man, and I think you've definitely surpassed that. You're 40 years old, but just a real man of wisdom. Thank you again for being here. Appreciate it. You guys, until next time, no excuses. Alpha up.
Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.